your first anime was Yamato, I believe.
Yes. Yeah.
And tell us about how you got involved in designing that. You were brought on to redesign, which is the
Yes.
iconic, hero ship.
Well, yeah, Nishizaki, his company called me. They flew me over there, met me up in Narita. Nishizaki was a member of the family. He was sort of considered sort of the bad boy of that family. But he was very successful. He's a very rich bad boy. And so he picked me up in this Ford van with television screens and telephones and everything inside of it, and a bar. I had sake on the way from Narita into Tokyo, and that back then I could take a trans-Pacific flight, smoke, get off the plane, have drinks. You know, you're younger and more resilient. So anyway, then I met Matsumoto-san, who designed the first generation of the Yamato. And I thought, you know what this is? This is a space, kind of a submarine battleship combination. But the first design that Matsumoto didn't have sort of a bottom to it that violated being sort of a land thing. So it was very close to the original Yamato destroyed battleship, but only for space. So I made it more three-dimensional. I had the lower mast, the high mast, and I wanted it to look like sort of a huge ninja ship with the big flaring, trailing layers and stuff. And so this is the drawing that I made of the Yamato, the longitudinal section. I did that first. Sent that over to Nishizaki, and it scared him because he said, "How can you do that without knowing how it looks on the outside?" And I thought, well, that's a dumb question. If you design something this elaborate, you have to know where everything is, then you enclose it, right? And that was the last drawing I did by hand on a drawing board with a drafting machine. And then I bought my computer, my Apple computer. So I designed the complete deck plans for all the decks, did interior views, about 20 of them. So it was a complete design job. And then a fellow who was working with me at the time, Nick Posbeck, who I had hired from NASA, was working with three-dimensional programs on the Macintosh at that time. And do you remember the 950 Quadras? Okay.
Yes.
Talk about. Anyway, so we did a three-dimensional model of the Yamato, which I still have, and it flies by the camera, and the turrets turn in the shadows. And we showed that to Nishizaki, and we said, because all of his animators had Macintoshes at home, at their home studios. And we said, here's what we can do. Instead of having this dumb drawing just come at you as a static getting bigger and bigger and bigger, we can do a three-dimensional model of the Yamato, run that through a line edge pickup filter. Then you'll print those on the acetate sheets, much like they did with Beauty and the Beast for Disney. Then you can hand color it on the back, whatever you want to do. It'll look just like animation, but it'll be real. It'll be rotational and all that. He had no idea what we were talking about. So that's why it came out with just the front shot, the side shot, and the back shot, and they just get bigger and smaller, but there's no change in three-dimensional volume. So that was exciting.
Did when you were doing the designs, you did all the decks, everything. Did he give you any restrictions? Were you pretty much given a free hand? Were they saying, "Oh, try to have the spirit of this or that"? Or
no, I had a free hand. And interestingly enough, we found a model kit, 1 to 200, of the Yamato battleship. We put that together, so I could look at this and get the spirit and the like the ghost in the shell kind of feeling, and then design my generation of Yamato with this feeling of this massive, cruising machine.
And it was, what was the experience like seeing all the work you had done, actually animated, and was that? I mean, I know that probably was.
Well, it's exciting,
Mm-hmm.
The movies in general, it's exciting. You design a set, and it's cardboard or plywood with gesso on it or whatever, and all it has to do is be photographed, so it doesn't have to do anything. Mm-hmm. And then so this big cardboard door slams shut, and you put a soundtrack to it, and it's 10 tons of concrete and steel, which I think is amazing. It's very, very fascinating.
And the Yamato project went on a number of years, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah. And then you were tasked at one point to design the Gundam for a live action movie, which never
Yes.
happened. And I'm wondering if you could share that story with us.
Well, the Lionsgate was going to produce a film with Gundam as the core character, I guess. I never saw a script for that. I was hired by them to work with Gary Demos and his partner on their Cray computer to model this thing. They had just completed The Last Starfighter with Ron Cobb designing that. And so I came in to design the characters for the classic Gundam story, the Zax, which are the bad guys, and then the Gundam mobile suit. And I was in the process of doing CAD work on that for eventual computer three-dimensional animation. And Lionsgate got a cease and desist from Sunrise New York office saying, you don't have the license from us to use these characters. So that ended that right away.
But you did do a rendering of the Gundam itself.
I did a poster for Sunrise of the classic Gundam, yes. And I don't know exactly what that was used, promotion or how that was used, but so I've had an association with Sunrise long before the Turn A series of designs.
Mm-hmm. So on your first trip, when you first met with Tomino-san and the animators, what was your mandate? I mean, did Tomino-san say, well, I want you to keep certain characteristics of the Gundam, or were you...
Oh, I knew that. I knew that the character had history to it. And in the meeting with Horiguchi was right across from me, and I don't speak Japanese. He spoke very little English, but we could draw to show each other. And we got going, and Tomino just left the room. He thought, well, this is going very, very well. So he just left the room, and we finished the whole day out at Sunrise offices trying to figure out what, and Horiguchi had some ideas from jet planes and stuff for the drive system of the Gundam character. So, no, I got along instantly with the staff very, very well. And they're some of the best animators in Japan, of course.
And did you get a sense that they wanted this particular Gundam? They brought you in to bring your sensibility. I mean, obviously they wanted your sensibilities, or they wouldn't have had you there. But were they trying to do something very different, or was there a philosophy behind what was going on?
Well, the philosophy was it has to be recognizable to the fans instantly. They hired me to create essentially a new Zero base, which can now be modified as story time goes on. And the difficult part was you had 20 years of fan memory in your head. So I had to be very careful of what I did to this character to change it, because I put the Roman helmet accent on. I moved the antenna down to the underneath the nose, which got sort of a negative reaction from the hardcore fans, but eventually everybody likes it, I think. And so that was the Gundam character. Once that was settled, then I went on to Diane Counter and the Flat Fighter. The Flat Fighter mentality there was in Oriental, especially Edo period, you have these almost like a flat pajama type costume. The legs are wider than they are long, essentially. And that was the Flat Fighter inspiration, to have this. That's why they call it the Flat Fighter. These legs almost like a mechanical, huge variation of that kind of costume approach.
And with the Gundam specifically, do you recall how many versions you guys went through before you settled on a...
Well, one of the first versions was a very robust, bulky design, because I thought, here's this powerful character, fighting evil, and these kids are running it. And that's when Inoue-san came down and said, it really should be a little bit more graceful. And so that changed the characteristic of it quite a bit. That original design then became the so-called sumo robot, when I increased the design intensity of that.
And you mentioned something interesting when you were talking about the Yamato design, which is you work from the inside out. And not being an artist, I would have assumed it was the opposite. You would think of the outside shape and then worry about the inside. Did you apply the same rationale to the Gundam? Did you think about how would this really work?
Yes, because first of all, they build toys of them, which have to hinge in a certain way. And secondly, in animation, if you're just doing animation, you can make an arm disappear partially into the chest as the arm comes around. You can't do that if it's a real physical piece of stuff. So I had to think about that. I was sensitive to the anime system of shading and color divisions. That's why the Gundam character has a hard line down the shin of the leg, for instance, and on the thigh, so that they can shade as a sharp line break, because that's how the style is. But all the characters, after the Gundam character was settled, then these other characters came into play for discussion to fulfill the story role. The Diane counter, I thought, this is this threatening thing from the moon, has the big head with a single eye, which is really a projector, and it's and that one, Tomino-san did want it to look not too mechanical, more organic, because they were growing these things on the moon. So that's why the legs have this sort of veined texture, and it isn't as sleek and mechanical as the other robots. I did a utility robot, very strange looking thing, and they did that. They used that, and then as the story progressed, Tomino-san wanted an enemy for Gundam at the same technological level. That's Turn X. So I had to think about this. So I get the storyline from our liaison lady for Turn X, and she said, I don't know, this is crazy. This thing all comes apart, then goes back together again. Well, that's weird. The arms come off as fighter ships, and the legs come off, and the thing that remains is the control center, is the head and upper thorax. And I thought, well, that's really weird. I spent sitting here, I'm trying to think, okay, how do you lock the arm on and unlock it? So I came up with a 6-prong thing with 3 on each that lock together. So I fly over to Tokyo, and I'm in the Akasaka Prince, my suite, and in about 10 days or so, I did 110 sketches of this Turn X and how it locked together and how it was supposed to look in scale to people and all that. So that goes into production. And when it was all over, we had a wrap party in the suite. Got complaints from other guests, but the hotel management was being paid very well. And then we went down to Izu, about 10 of us, on a celebration trip at is it a ryokan, the mountain inns? Mm-hmm. We had a kaiseki dinner. The table was from here to that glass window, about I don't know, probably about 6 or 7 meters long. And we had course after course after course, and big bottles of sake, I mean this big, and a fantastic time. Then we all the guys went in and had a soaking bath, just hot water, and then to bed. So I wake up the next morning, and I'm still thinking about the final details of this Turn X. I wake up the next morning, I throw open the windows of my room, and the whole mountainside was pink. It was sakura time. Sakura. I thought, oh my God, this is magical. So I took my 8.5 piece, 11 by 11 inch piece of paper and sketched all the final details of the Turn X. So the finished details are really done under the inspiration of this pink mountainside of cherry blossoms.
That's amazing. It sounds like the Turn X was a much bigger challenge than...
Yes, it was.
Just because of all the intricate parts, and you wanted
to... But I've been told it sells just as well as the Gundam character, because that's the enemy, the conflict entrance into the story.
And what was it like working with... you've worked with some amazing directors, Ridley Scott, James Cameron. In Japan, Tomino-san is very highly regarded as one of the fathers of...
He's a great storyteller.
Of anime. Yeah. So what was the experience like working with that team? I mean, it sounds like it was really smooth.
Oh, it was seamless. Once Tomino-san knew that we were fleshing out the story visually with these characters, the robot characters, and he definitely approved each one. It's his story. And then working with the anime guys and the people at Sunrise, and it was seamless. It was very, very nice. It was a very nice experience all the way through.
The whole giant robot phenomenon, which is really started by Gundam, I mean, there was predecessors. There was Gigantor in the U.S., but just that's a very specific thing to Japan that was kind of finally found a home with Transformers in America. But what do you think from a a story standpoint or a design standpoint is interesting, and why the giant robot is so attractive to people. It makes cool toys, obviously.
Well, the giant is a very, very staple part of fantasy stories. You know, Jack and the Beanstalk for Western fantasy stories. I mean, the giants, the ogres, and all. Giants are just a part of fantasy stories. So to make a mechanical one is a almost like an adaptation of the same fantasy underpinnings of fantasy stories. You have a threatening giant, you have a kind giant. So you have Gundam, you have Turn X, you have these other threatening robots like Diane Counter from the Moon in the Gundam story. The factor that I enjoyed very, very much was the way these were fitted into the story, and the genius of Tomino-san. Of every movie has a gimmick if it's a clever movie. The gimmick in Blade Runner was we have this horrible microclimate. It's raining, it's humid, it's hot. Rachel's running around in a fur coat. Deckard has long top coat on, which is sort of this noir thing, right? Tomino-san has the settings for Gundam Turn A as almost like a medieval or early 20s. The cars are old cars, the airplanes, the buildings are some of them are half timbered. So that's the gimmick, the stylistic gimmick, because it's sort of retro future fantasy, and it's brilliant.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about that because it is a very low-tech world.
Yes.
Yet there are these high-tech machines. And do you think that story type of story, the robot, and is that just an evergreen story, or do you think there'll come a time when we really do have, as you say, artificial life running around, if that story, those types of stories will lose their meaning to us? Or?
I would think so, yes, because then it's no longer fantasy. It's real. You have a robot in your house that does things for you, that looks like a person, which is kind of spooky. I think it's going to take people to get used to that, but it'll be less and less threatening if they're designed well. I would prefer to see essentially a non-human duplicate, a sleek robot that floats over the floor and has sort of interesting lights on it. I'm thinking, a slimmer, athletic version of R2-D2. It's amazing to make a duplicate human as a robot entity, and you can do that. It's being done right now. So that's no longer difficult. But I think just to have a machine that does stuff would be, for me, more interesting.
To Gundam and Yamato, when they came in the late 70s, really ignited and created the anime industry in Japan. I mean, the whole industry was built on those two foundations because they were so successful in the late 70s. And you've redesigned both.
I'm very honored to do that,
Yeah. A record probably will never be replicated, certainly not by a Western artist. So what's it like to reflect on that, to have had an opportunity to redesign the two most important hero ships of Japan?
Well, it's an honor to have that chance. And it is unique, I'm sure. The incident of being asked to do that by two completely separate sources is a compliment to my visibility from the movie industry, which carries over, and my ability as an appreciative admirer of that culture base, the design, and the cultural customs that creates the design in the first place.
And it's a record I don't think will ever be broken.
Probably not.
Just if you can step back and look at your own work, what do you think it is about your aesthetic that is so embraced, especially in Japan? Is there something you think you specifically bring to your...
Well, it's very difficult to analyze your own work, and probably you shouldn't do it too carefully.
Sure.
But I think it's the precision of the design sensibility. I'm very, very careful about what I do in terms of design and illustrating the design. It's an appreciation of proportion and an insistence on anything I design is part of a story in my head. And that, I think, is very important because it gives it legitimacy from a visual standpoint, and when you analyze it, if you're a designer or just a layperson, it looks like it should be that way. And I think that's part of the appreciation formula.
Just going back to the design of the Gundam itself for Turn A, you were able to. I probably shouldn't say this because I'll get in trouble, but to me, a lot of the Gundams look very similar. They change the colors, and no offense to my employers, but they don't do a lot with it. And you were actually able to really redesign it. And you even mentioned there was some controversy over some of the choices with hard, but you were really able to put your stamp on it. And I'm just wondering how that felt to be able to really just say, okay, I'm going to build this from the bottom up.
The original Gundam it's essentially the sensitivity to what makes a machine look a certain way. The original Gundam had more square cross section